Welcome and thanks for tuning in to the Victorian Aboriginal News Van Talks podcast. I'm your host, Charles Pakana.
Victorian Aboriginal News acknowledges and pays respect to traditional owners and custodians across Australia. We acknowledge the elders who have gone before, those who currently lead their communities, and those who will follow in years and generations to come.
When it comes to cultural safety and cultural awareness in our modern society, there is an ever-present need to embed this in our education systems, particularly in primary and secondary schools. Now, where some schools have achieved varying levels of success, others have either failed miserably or simply not even made the attempt. Yet there is definite hope. And joining me today on the program is someone who has devoted years to bringing about cultural learning change in the Victorian education system. She's a Bunurong woman who, along with being a first-term member of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, 10 years with the Department of Education, and now with the Victorian Aboriginal Child and Community Association, or VACA, as a Senior Manager of Education. And that is Zoe Upton. Zoe, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Zoe, in the best-case scenario, what does cultural safety look like in the Victorian education system, just in a school in general?
It's interesting because it's not that complex as what our education system has previous thoughts about. So it's just for our mob to come in and look around and see that we're acknowledged, to look around and have that welcoming feeling that it's okay to be Aboriginal when you walk through the door. And that actually is paramount on how we actually embed things further. So that's, bare basics. But going in and seeing, Wominjeka at the front door,
always
or
nice. Yeah.
The flags, some, local artwork, having an acknowledgement on country throughout their newsletters, that's just bare basics really. But those are the little things that our mob are looking for, to note. Yes, it's okay to tick the box and say that we're black. No, I'm not going to be disadvantaged or treated poorly because I have done that. And actually then that allows the school to have those little wins, and then they can start embedding things like celebrating NAIDOC, doing a morning tea for the apology, not just doing those, and understanding that NAIDOC does fall on school holidays, but schools can actually, I know schools that do a NAIDOC day on either side of those holidays.
So really it can be a very easy starting point, but I assume that what you'd be wanting to see as someone who's been involved in education and cultural safety in education for goodness knows how long, you'd want to see that starting point built on substantially over years to make it a progressive thing. Now, in order to achieve that, what's required when it comes to getting the staff aware of what needs to be done? And I can see a big smile on your face right now, so I'm looking forward to this answer.
Well, I suppose the Education Department does offer training. It's called Community Understanding and Safety Training. So, and that is run by our career education workforce. And they give their life stories and how they actually, why Aboriginal people, don't necessarily trust systems and doesn't necessarily want to open up about why the reasons why they're not attending at school. So engaging in that space. So there is resources available for our schools. It's just, taking that leap and having that faith that you're going to be supported from the career workforce, because they want to be doing themselves out of a job. That's number one. That's just starting point. But number two, holding yourself accountable as a school.
So what do you mean by that?
Some schools have receptionists that, if a black kid walks in the door, they're finally here. Instead of thinking, what is the colonial load that child has had prior to actually walking in through the door? They might be 15 minutes late, but they may have been starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and, really struggling to get to that table. And I think, changing those cultural attitudes, and that's not a cultural as in Aboriginal culture, that's school culture, that's workplace culture. It's not okay to roll your eyes when a child walks in through the door. It's let's celebrate that they actually walk through that door.
I just want to chase up on the fact that you mentioned colonial load, and this typically was referred to as cultural load, but that was pretty well an offensive thing because it's not our culture that's the load on us.
No.
But it's the load placed on our shoulders by, well, the colonial attitude. So just explain that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so originally cultural load was given as that was our backpack.
Yeah.
And so we carried all these other responsibilities that were associated with cultural load. And so therefore Aboriginal people got burnt out pretty quickly. Recently, and I love it actually, the way that I think that someone from KYC had actually mentioned it, and this is a youth push.
KYC being the Koori Youth Council.
Yeah. And it's, push from our youth, and that's so incredible, like that our youth are feeling so strong to actually pull us old fellas up.
Yeah.
So I'll take that on. And so it was more that culture is actually a protective factor, and it's something that I talk about in child protection and through our education systems is when we have good culture and connections to culture, that is grounding for our mob. So that's protective.
Yeah.
And to put it as a backpack that this is actually weighing us down, when actually, in fact, the systems are weighing us down, that we have to fight to have ourselves recognised in a constitution that we didn't want to be in the first place, then to being in an education system where we just want to be accepted for being valued participants in the community, whether it's at school, work, down the street.
Let's get back to the schools and the role of the staff in all of this, because I would assume just like in an organisation that might be introducing a reconciliation action plan, unless there's that buy-in from the extremely senior levels, any degree of action plan or reconciliation or cultural safety being embedded within the infrastructure of the organisation simply isn't going to work. How critical is it in a school to have that principal and that senior staff involvement and support?
It's the only key in, really.
Sure.
But I think it goes higher.
Go on.
It goes up to our DepSecs, having the commitment there and actually changing the policies within the department and wording things stronger. That means that you're going to be held accountable. So our schools, Victorian schools, have an annual implementation plan, and having some really clear goals within that implementation plan is going to hold that school accountable, because they then get ratings and things like that from the Department of Education. So I think that's where it sort of, it needs to be higher, and it needs to be really strong in a system that is inherently racist.
Is this something that's missing from the system right now? Because you seem to be alluding to that.
Yeah, look, I don't think that a lot of wording in policies is you must.
Yeah.
Not you are mandated. Someone who is obliged or, committed in a policy kind of space as what a principle is, they're going to read that and go, I have to do this.
Yeah.
Not I must, but I'm not going to get in any trouble if I don't do it.
It's all in the wording.
Yeah.
But what about those schools that are really wanting, regardless of policies, they're really wanting to push ahead? They want to create a safe space for their First Nations families and students, because it is families as well, isn't it? It's not just the students. Actually, let's just park it on that one for right now. How important is it for the schools to have that broader view and realise they're making it safer for the families and extended families of First Nations students and not just the kids themselves?
If you don't make it safe for the families, you won't get the kids there.
And that comes back to those kids who've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. You don't know what's been going on to get them to school.
They could be looking after their siblings. They could be feeding dogs or, cleaning up the house. They just don't know. Or they, might have been up playing PlayStation too late and can't get out of bed. It's
not just the Koori kids that are doing that, sis. Come on.
100%. It's not just Koori kids. It is across nation. And, gaming is an issue, but also the policies don't necessarily reprimand those non-Indigenous kids the way that the system does today for ours.
So what can schools do to make it better for families and for the kids beyond that acknowledgement of country, the bit of artwork, the womenjaka or whatever when the students and the families come in? What else can they do?
They can be approachable.
And how does that come out?
It's just, mob know when people are judging them. And it is a cultural change within the schools. There are some schools that are doing it brilliantly and really kicking goals.
And there are some schools...
And then there's some schools that are just... I don't...
We're not naming names here.
No, absolutely not. I would never do that.
Not while you're being recorded, at least.
No, but I just think that when I've gone to schools, it's not that the schools don't want to do it. They're frightened,
What's frightening them?
That they get it wrong.
But this is right across the whole society, isn't it? We don't want to speak to the TOs or the elders because we're going to say something wrong.
Yep.
We've got to get rid of that fear factor.
Yes.
So what do you recommend?
So I think that's why having those consults coming in with your CESOs or, the Koori workforce, that's just a scraping the surface kind of thing. But also in those casts, like we used to have elders come out and schools would actually say, we're just so scared of doing things wrong.
Yeah.
And the biggest message that I got from one of the elders who's now passed, she always said, when you don't do it, you're actually offensive. But if you do it and you get it wrong, you can fix it because you're trying. So you're acknowledging us by doing it. By not doing it all, you're actually not acknowledging us, which is way more offensive than, saying we're Undri wrong.
Always the number one concern, of course. The CESOs you made mention of before, the Koori Engagement Support Officers, now they have a role to go out to any number of schools. Let's be really blunt here, Zoe, because a number of schools I've gone to haven't seen their CESOs in goodness knows how long. It's not the CESO's fault. We know that because there are so few for so many flippin' schools out there, and the number of schools is growing all the time, but the number of CESOs does not seem to be growing. Yeah. Is this something the Department of Education really needs to be looking at and ramping up significantly?
I think it's a really big thing that they need to be looking at in relation to employment. But also I think I'm not in there anymore, and I really loved my journey in the education system. I wouldn't be where I am today without them. But I do think having one person service 20 schools, 300 kids, we wouldn't do that to a teacher.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have a teacher service more than 25 students in a classroom.
So what do you think is needed?
It's interesting. I think our CESOs we need more Aboriginal people on the ground.
Yeah.
We need to be able to make our Aboriginal staff feel safe in schools as well. Like, we also need to start doing these employment programs around teaching. We need black teachers in schools.
So this is something that really isn't talked about very much. We talk about the cultural safety for the students, but we don't really talk about the staffing level of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers. From your observations over the years, is this a problem? Is it improving?
I think it's improving. I think there is programs out there that are helping Aboriginal people become teachers. There's a program that has been released by the Department of Education to get Aboriginal people into the teaching service.
Yeah.
I do believe that we need to ensure that when we're not only giving them those opportunities, but actually placing them in schools that are going to be nurturing, they're not going to feel isolated, they're going to feel welcomed. So I think, it's twofold, really.
Sure.
The cultural safety is around teaching our children and giving them opportunities to want to become teachers, and then allowing those opportunities to come in through the Department of Education, but also working with our principals to say, okay, how safe are you for people, for our mob?
So we're playing the long game, really. We're looking at actually educating the next generation of teachers now and encouraging them through to the system.
Yes.
Education system hasn't really been the best right across Australia at keeping people in regardless of who or what they are, though, has it? We're not going to go into that. The nod is telling me everything. What about the general community? Because there are so many people out there, allies, collaborators, whatever they want to call themselves, who really want to ensure that their local schools are, A, providing a safe environment for the Koori students there, and that the non-Koori students are also not being subjected to this whitewashed history that we were all subjected to for so many years. What are some of the key actions that these collaborators and allies could be undertaking?
I think looking at the Bunurong education plan, which is the 10-year plan, that will be revisited in the next 12 months. But that is the best education plan that I've ever came across whilst working for the department. It was consultative, it was with community, it's really aspirational based, so pushing our NAPLAN results up. Bunurong means is the Wamba Wamba word for the cypress tree, and also working alongside people like Victorian Aboriginal Education Association Incorporated, VAI. They have incredible pieces of resources within their website that can help assist with our teachers when they're doing their learning plans. There's books in there that you can pull out that you can teach everybody. And Bunurong is all about creating a safe and strong identity of our Aboriginal community, celebrating it across all of our communities, and really creating those safety networks within the school system. We have the local Aboriginal Education Consultative Group, LAECGs, and having our allies participate in that and have a yarn with those local mobs that know those, because, you know, what happens here in Bundoora in comparison to what happens over in Dandenong, it's different communities.
Chalk and cheese, absolutely.
You know, the fundamentals are the same, but they're the different type of community in each of those areas.
Of
so
course.
if you're an ally, you want to get involved, you want to help promote really good, sustainable curriculum, have a yarn with their mob.
So we'll provide links to VAI, to the Department of Education strategy that Zoe mentioned, and also to the Aboriginal Educational Consultative Groups on our website that'll coincide with this particular interview with Zoe. Zoe, you made mention of identity. You've just touched on it a couple of times, and it's something that I yarned with you earlier about. One of the things that I have seen in schools, and it doesn't matter where they are, but typically in sort of Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, a lot of Aboriginal kids who can pass as white, and we use that terminology, they have a very, very tough time identifying, because even some of the teachers might say to them, yeah, but what part Aboriginal are you? How Aboriginal are you? And we know that that's incredibly offensive. How do schools go about making it safe for students to identify?
Yeah.
It's a
That's
tough one.
a tough one.
I know.
My children are fair and could pass as white.
Yeah.
And they have had those same conversations with kids at school. In fact, when the referendum didn't go through, it was outright racism that the school allowed to go through. And they didn't mean it. Like, they didn't mean, like, you know, just like casual racism isn't meant to be mean, but still it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, our kids disengage if they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And part of identifying is this real strong connection with your community and who you are. And I think, you know, being a person that's grown up, I didn't know I was Aboriginal until I was 10. But knowing that I was Aboriginal and having that piece come back into my body when I found out, it was like this piece
Pretty
of
amazing, isn't it?
jigsaw, the puzzle that went into my guts.
Yeah.
And then I was so proud. I brought my books down to the school, and I won't mention her name, but her name is etched in my soul. She said, "You can't possibly be Aboriginal."
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when our kids are coming in really strong and really proud, or even if they're a bit shy and shame about it, you've got to create those opportunities for them to shine in that space. Not every Aboriginal child's going to be, I know everything about rabbit-proof fence and, colonisation before.
How to play the didge,
How to play
do all
the
the dances,
didge. Yeah. Some of them are just sort of slowly grading in and going, I'm not sure who I am in this space.
Yeah.
I know I'm this, but I also know I'm this. So my son really struggled with, my mum identifies really strongly as Aboriginal, my dad is not.
Yeah.
And they don't get along. So who am I in that space? So, giving those opportunities to really celebrate culture, and not even culture, identity. And I think this is one thing, we don't expect schools to teach culture because you don't know culture, but you can learn community and you can learn about identity and you can learn about mobs. And so I think that's where the fear factor for schools come in, is that, I can't teach culture. Well, we don't expect you to do that. We expect you to celebrate, acknowledge community and Aboriginal peoples. So, yeah, I think showing the activists, looking at their stories, local elders, local artwork,
Yeah.
having people like Brooke Wandon come in, or, Mandy Nicholson.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible, strong women that know language are just absolutely...
You can't beat them,
I don't even have the true words of how wonderful they are and how giving they are to everybody.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And of course, we've had Brooke Wandon on this program before. And yes, for those of you who are wondering, of course, we'll be getting Auntie Mandy on the program. She's definitely on the production schedule. Zoe, I want to thank you so much indeed for coming onto the program. Really, best of luck with all the work that you're doing at VACA, and of course, the amazing work that you're doing as the Bunurong representative on the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria for Treaty. Respect to you, sis.
Thank you so much. And of course, I could talk for hours about that.
And we will get you online at some stage talking about that. So thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.
For a full transcript of this interview, visit the Victorian Aboriginal News website at vicaboriginalnews.com.au. Until our next episode, stay safe and stay informed.